Hello, Honors 410. I hope everyone's doing well, was able to enjoy their Labor Day. I had a couple notes I wanted to lead off class with. These are things that came up in the live discussion session that I had last week, both for this class as well as for some other classes. I'm kind of merging ideas they came across in different formats here, but one of them was about notifications that students get via Canvas for these discussion threads. I think this is one of my other classes that brought up the point, but I feel like it might translate to this group as well, where some students were expressing some concern just because they were getting notifications every time someone participated in a discussion thread that they had participated in, and it was becoming just an overwhelming number of emails coming their way. And I think some of you have already worked through the settings and may have done this back in the spring semester to make sure that's not happening for you, but I also think that there might be some folks who are still struggling with this sort of thing. So I just wanted to draw attention. I'm going to copy and paste some comments that a student from another one of my classes provided to me, because my view as the professor is slightly different from your view as students. So I don't exactly know how all the settings work firsthand on your end, but the student was able to give a pretty good kind of detailed account of how he was able to adjust his settings. And I believe the tiers are that you can set it up such that you just don't receive any emails at all with notifications about when people contribute to discussions, or you just get a digest version of it. So I'll paste those in the discussion thread below. And then in addition to that, I had a student from one of my classes bring up a question of if they could participate in discussion threads, not via text form, but rather by speaking, either doing an audio recording or a video recording of themselves to post to the discussion thread. And I'm open to that, at least on a trial basis. My reservations with it are more around for some students who might be participating in the class in such a way that it's difficult to always be able to listen, that you might not have headphones or earbuds you can use, or be trying to do a lot of this work in a more public setting, or at least among family or things like that. So it's easier to process things in text form, or otherwise there might be bandwidth issues having extra videos to stream. So I'm not completely sold on this being the best thing for our class, but I'm definitely open to trying it for a little while if that is helpful to some students. Especially if you just feel that you express yourself better just by speaking as opposed to committing it all to writing. I'm open to seeing how that works. So we can certainly give that a shot here. Okay, so with all of that square though, for today's class, I want to put a real focus on the flash fiction submissions we've received for this class. So I'm going to be sharing 3 of them in this discussion thread, and I want to direct students a lot of your attention to focusing on these for today. In part, because I know it isn't sort of an extra reading commitment I'm giving you, but students have put their hard work into it. And, for all of you who didn't participate for this first cluster, you're going to be coming up at a later point in the semester, and I think that there's real value in giving each other's work respect and kind of reading it and responding to it in the discussion threads. Remember, this is sort of a foundational exercise. We're building towards those workshop drafts that we're going to work on later on in this semester. So for this project, though, another reminder I give, though, is I'm going to post the stories in the discussion thread here, encourage you to read all of them, encourage you to comment on at least one of them, and I encourage you to comment on all 3 of them, but I realize just, with time constraints being what they are, and, just with your own reactions being what they are, you might not have as much to say about some stories as others, but try to comment on at least one of them, and again, I encourage it to be all 3. And we're going to keep the feedback positive for the purposes of this exercise. We are going to do a writing workshop later on in the semester where you're free to give more constructive criticism and suggestions and things along those lines. But for now, mostly positive kind of feedback. If you want to ask questions in terms of things you're legitimately a little bit confused about, or just that you want to know about the writer's process, that is fair game. Or if you want to give just about where this could go next, or expanding this to a larger piece, I'll consider that fair game, as long as we're erring on the side of kind of positivity here. And the reason I want to do that is not just to be nice and be friendly, but more so just because we recognize that students are putting forth essentially rough drafts here, right? Because students haven't had very long to write these things, especially this first flash cluster, right? They haven't even gotten to see other student examples of these yet. So I don't think it would be fair to give them a lot of criticism. And I provide some degree of criticism behind the scenes in some cases, just in terms of suggestions, or again ways I think a student can make things even better. But in terms of public discussion, I want to keep these pretty positive. So give them a read, give your positive, honest kind of, ideas in response to it, things we might be able to take away for future writing projects, both for the writer themselves, but also for yourself. Because part of the purpose for this exercise is to see what each other are doing. I've selected, some readings, and I've selected things to lecture you on, but a lot of times student pieces bring up things that I wouldn't have thought of necessarily. And in fact, I would go so far as to say the three pieces that we're looking at for today, there might be some overlap with other things we're talking about in the class, but I think more so are going in different directions, the things I wouldn't necessarily have taken us to, and that's really one of the key values of this exercise. So I'm really excited to see what people say. I probably will not say a lot in these discussions, mostly because I'm giving students feedback from myself kind of behind closed doors, or in the comments directly on their assignment. But for the benefit of the class, again, I welcome you to still give those comments. I may weigh in if I strongly disagree with something, or if I want to clarify a point or reinforce a point that I think a student brought up that was really excellent. But otherwise, I'll probably lean back for the most part on those discussions as they appear in the discussion board. So, okay, for the rest of today's video, I wanted to turn to Yellow. So I asked everyone to read the first segment of this novella, and this is often the case when we're dealing with something in chunks and kind of excerpts and not reading the whole thing at once, that it's a little difficult to comment on bigger picture issues just because I don't want to spoil anything coming up. And I know some students have already read the whole thing. A few of you have already privately contacted me about that to bring up aspects of this that you liked, or questions that you had, or just kind of observations. That's great. So I'm going to ask that we hold off on spoilers though until the whole class gets there. So this class and next class we're going to be dealing with pretty discrete chunks of this thing. The last class will have the final 15-20 pages or so that I've assigned to you. But in that class, we'll also have some room to get onto bigger picture kind of concerns of this thing and bigger takeaways. One more note just before I forget to mention, I also want to make is, so again, we're reading just the novella Yellow from this book here, but I do welcome students to read the other short stories from this collection, to write one-page response papers to them to earn extra credit, especially if you've already read the book. Again, a few students have let me know they read the whole book, in fact, already. You've already done at least half the work of that process. It's just writing a reflection paper now to get that extra credit. It's a good way to kind of shore up your grade in the class. And to be frank, I think it's a really good collection. I don't even necessarily think that I would say that Yellow is the best part of the book. More just it kind of speaks most directly to the themes that I wanted to get to in this class. There's a significant boxing component to this, right? And on at least a superficial level, I'd say that's the main link that Yellow has to our core class content. But also there are some themes that I think get to some ideas around violence, either more literally or more metaphorically, that a couple of you already touched upon in reading response journals. I was really impressed with, but I think we could also suss out a little bit more in our discussion thread here. But without further ado, I'm just going to take us to a few places here. I welcome students to get to, as always, take us to other places in terms of your observations, questions, anything along those lines from this first 21-page segment that I assigned to you. So I want to start right at the very beginning of this piece on page 197 here. If it's anything like it's looking at my camera right now, you're seeing mostly just glare, so I apologize. That's not really useful to hold it up. That's a little clearer there. But page 197, if you're in the same version of the book, but otherwise it's the very start of the novella regardless. So this first paragraph reads, "A woman from North Carolina, someone he dated for only 3 weeks in business school, once told Danny Kim that he was lucky not to have the flat nose and dull features characteristic of most Orientals. She had meant it as a compliment of sorts. Her idea of affection was to mock people, and eventually her stereotypes about Asians became a source of her romantic repartee. One morning, after making love throughout the night, she wouldn't let Danny fall asleep, not yet exhausted herself. 'You could make me doubt my manhood, pressuring me like this,' he said. 'Your manhood,' she said slyly, glancing down at his apparatus, 'if I could find it.'" So with this first segment here, Camera slipped there. Sorry about that. With this first segment here, there is certainly a sort of racially kind of diversity kind of infused piece of this here in talking about someone, of Asian descent and kind of stereotypes associated with them. And I'm curious about what we make of Don Lee's choice to start there. What is he doing? A lot as we look at any piece of fiction, but I think especially longer works of fiction like novellas and novels, what happens in the first page or two is often really emblematic of some of the core elements that the author is getting at. And so I think it's worth paying attention there why we think that Lee started there. And I think there's some relatively obvious, it's not a trick question, kind of reasons why he would have begun the novella there. This other piece, he mentions that her idea of affection was to mock people. And that sounds sort of counterintuitive on a really literal level, and yet I suspect many of us might be able to relate to that. Not necessarily that you personally do it, but that you might have encountered this, that you might see other people do this, you may have experienced it firsthand, where affection through mocking or through teasing, right? What is this? Where do we see this? How do we recognize this? Why do people do this, right? I'm just curious of probing that a little bit with the class. For pages 201 to 202, skipping ahead just a tiny bit here, it says paragraph starting, certainly there were incidents. Again, for me, it's on 201. I know we have a few different versions of this book going around. So I'll read this part. Certainly there were incidents, like the time his family had been vacationing in the Sierras and had stopped at a convenience store. A drunk, a big, florid man with his shirt open and his gut out had staggered up to them. I forgive you, he had said. Pearl Harbor. I forgive you for Pearl Harbor. And then he had kissed Danny's father on the mouth. Danny had watched horrified. He was appalled by the man, but more so by his father, for letting himself suffer this indignity when politely thanking the man. It had been days before Danny could talk to his father, much less look at him in the face. So this moment here, I think is pretty telling in its own right. The father is mistaken for Japanese, right? And there is sort of this sentiment of overgeneralization of, I can't tell people who are Korean from Japanese, from Chinese, and so on and so forth. That I think many of us have probably heard at some point or another in our lives. That in and of itself is problematic, but the father doesn't correct him here, right? Because there certainly could be a difference if he got confrontational about it and corrected the man. And the father avoids conflict and sort of takes it, even that kiss. And I think that's a really telling moment here. And again, I'm interested in if students have additional interpretations there, or again, what this is doing at this early stage of the novella. Skipping ahead a couple more pages to page 204 here. Let's see. So we have Danny first meeting this man who's training for boxing at the gym, and we learn just a little bit later that he actually is a trainer himself. That's sort of his job, the reason why he's there. But he says that Danny had the impulse to squint. And I really like this moment here. I just want to draw some attention to it. There's a literal glare there, right? So he's just sort of capturing the image of what this looks like from the point of view of our protagonist here, our point of view character, that there's a literal glare, and so he has to sort of squint to look at it. But I would suggest that it's pulling double duty here, that it's also kind of figuratively that this man is so impressive, right? That he almost makes him squint because he's like godlike, like oh, you're so impressive, it's almost hard to look. And I think that's again an interesting moment there. I think that Lee is efficiently kind of accomplishing a lot in that moment. So I just wanted to mention that moment in the text. And the last place I want to go to is on page 205. For me, it's the last paragraph on 205. That paragraph starts, "It was the most impressive thing Danny had ever seen." Cutting ahead a couple sentences here, he thought it'd be the best of all worlds, to have that power, especially if you were small or slight, to know that if it came down to it, you could drop someone, that you were, despite all appearances, lethal, dangerous. And I'm not going to unpack that too much for you all, because I want to leave that one open for a little bit more discussion. But this is where I think we most directly get into some of the things we've already been discussing in class about kind of violence. where why would this be appealing to someone, this ability to drop someone? Because I think that that's relatable, even, for those of us who don't identify as being at all violent ourselves, but I think all the more so for people who might have, been in a few fights in their day, right? Or at least be kind of intrigued by this stuff and maybe watch combat sports and things along those lines. There does seem like there's some appeal to this idea of being able to drop someone, right? I'm curious of reactions to that. And again, I'm barely scratching the surface here. There's a lot of other content here that I think is worth talking about that I haven't, brought up here. Feel free to weigh in on all of that in the discussion thread below as well. Okay, I'm going to leave it there for now. So thank you as always for watching. Really look forward to discussion of the Don Lee novella Yellow in that first leg of it, and then all the more so of the flash submissions we've had come in from students. So thanks everyone, and I will catch you next time.